Today we had such a treat. I just got off the conversation with David Burton. He's part of this thing called the Engage Neighborhood. And he had some fascinating stuff in our conversation. It was actually through a sermon series on the art of neighboring, just like we finished, that God began to slowly churn his heart for neighboring. And so you'll want to hear what he's done on a personal level, but also on a professional level. Some of the things they're doing in Missouri is great, like National Good Neighbor Week happens in Missouri. What would that look like for that to happen here? And then we just had some other interesting conversations about what's the opposite of love. What does it mean to be kind of a plus one each day in your neighbor? And then what is the trust and fear spiral that often happens? So lots of good stuff in our conversation today with David Burton. And I just can't wait for you to hear. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. So we just wrapped up our Art of Neighboring sermon series. And so now you had your own experience with the art of neighboring a few years ago. So why don't you tell some of our folks about your own experience with the art of neighboring?
Yeah. I had interaction with that book. And in fact, just to jump ahead, I just got back from Colorado Springs. I got to spend a whole day with Dave Runyon. He is so good to mentor and encourage others that are interested in neighboring, still very much an advocate. But for me personally, back in 2018, our church added the word neighbors to our church mission statement. And our pastor gave a sermon about loving your neighbor. And I've got to tell you, I left that sermon unchanged because I left that sermon thinking, doesn't really apply to me. I love my neighbors already. Now, how did I know that I love my neighbors? Because when I take my dog on a walk, I pick up after him. I put my Christmas lights away before January 1st. We don't throw loud, raucous parties. I chop up my leaves during the fall. All these things I'm thinking, I'm already a great neighbor. Golly, I don't need the sermon. And that, as luck would have it, or as maybe it's more providential as God works, the next day we left for vacation, went to Colorado Springs to see my sister-in-law. And she works at church there, and they were just kicking off their new theme for a new year, which was going to be love thy neighbor. And so I sat through another sermon about loving your neighbor, but still I would have said this does not apply to me because I am already a good neighbor. And then someone on her staff gave me a copy of Dave Runyon's book, The Art of Neighboring, to read. He'd heard that I like to read books, and I was intrigued by it. I decided to listen to it on Audible coming across Kansas while my family all slept in the vehicle. And I wasn't even done with chapter 1, and I was already saying, I'm a horrible neighbor. Because what I had in my mind was a good neighbor was not love. It was really apathy. And it turns out the opposite of love is not hate. It's apathy. And at that point, we'd been here, this house, about 18 years. And people had moved, come and gone around us. And when the new family moved in, I didn't even bother to get to know them. Because remember, I'm a good neighbor because I leave them alone.
Yeah.
And so I really only knew the names of one set of our neighbors. But that series of events and that book really got a hold of my heart and convinced me that was not the right way to be living. That was not God's model example for us. And that really what I had was apathy, not love.
Yeah. So by trade, you're is it community developer? Is that what?
Yeah, community development specialist with University of Missouri Extension.
So before you got into kind of this neighboring emphasis, like what were some of the things that you were doing? Because like when I think about community development in my, now it's all about neighboring, but like what did it look like before, and then what does your job look like now?
Yeah, well, before I was helping cities, municipalities, organizations with leadership training, teaching whether it was employees or members of a community. We have a leadership training curriculum that we would go through. Also did programs where we would go in and help the city with a mission and a vision statement, thinking about what their objectives need to be going forward as part of community development. And my background was also media and marketing. So I did a lot of classes and programs focused on media relations, creating a marketing plan, marketing your organization. So some of those niche areas was how I was focusing. And So yeah, I mean, I had that personal moment of conviction about we have to do better as neighbors because we're not being a loving neighbor. And I set out to make those connections. My wife and I both did. Um, Me personally, I began by ringing doorbells with a little card that we fixed up, had all of our contact information on it, and delivering a plate of cookies.
Mm.
And that may not sound like a big deal, but my wife makes really outstanding chocolate chip cookies. And so this was a big sacrifice to me. And but even then, you know, everybody was gracious, but that's just the start of the process. But even as I was doing that, there was that some moment where the light bulb went off in my head and said, wait, what I'm trying to do now in my neighborhood in terms of building connections and getting people to use their assets and gifts and talents, this is community development.
Yeah.
At a very, very grassroots level. I talked to my boss about it. He was agreeable to me doing some academic things and develop a little curriculum, see if there was something there. They gave me like 5% of my time to work on it. And now it's really 100% of my time as it's grown in popularity and new connections, it's really seen as a valuable part of community development, at least in the state of Missouri.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, so you're on this professional track, but then you're also just on this personal track. So tell me a little bit about, okay, so it started with cookies, it started with your contact information, which was great because like the other day we were leaving town and we have one neighbor's phone number, but I happened to see another guy that hey, could you put our trash cans back? You know, like just using that as a good excuse to kind of do that.
Yes.
And my wife Heather was like, did you get his phone number? Just to, so in case, hey, we had a package that came in. I'm like, no, like, why would I do that? So yeah, so tell me about kind of this personal track. What were some of the relationships? And I mean, that was about 2018, you said. So
Yes.
we've had kind of 6 years. What are some
Yes.
of the things or wins or losses or what's gone well, what hasn't gone well for you?
Sure. Wow, we could talk about that for a long time. I've got plenty of examples of both,
Okay.
of things not to do and things to do. You know, even because as I was trying to make changes in my own life, I started trying to read other books and things on the topic and learn more as I went. But one of my favorite phrases, Chris and Elizabeth McKinney use this phrase in their book Placed for a Purpose. They talk about neighboring as a crock pot. It's low and slow.
Yeah.
And so, I knocked on all those doors. In fact, one of my neighbors, they barely cracked their door. And I told her what I was up to. And I said, this is for you. And she said, how much do I owe you for this? I said, well, you don't owe me anything. Just wanting to start developing a relationship. And then it turns out one of my neighbors, I didn't know it from the outside of the house, kind of a similar reaction, guarded. But as I got to know her, it was a hoarding situation. I wasn't looking for that type of thing. And while there were some challenges with that, that also became an opportunity for ministry.
Yeah.
My wife and I have said that many times. It's kind of the ministry of being available, the ministry of being seen, and the ministry of being willing to take some time to talk and to help people with things that come up. But it's still like a crock pot. It's a gradual thing. I had those cards out and nobody instantly started texting or calling me from that. Yeah. But that was an initiation and a way to kind of a safe approach. But I still had to linger at the mailbox or see people out walking and strike up conversations and say, hey, can I get your phone number? And some were more willing to do that than others. I had one neighbor, it was almost 2 years before I ever got his phone number. So some people are just more guarded than others. Yep. But at the same time, not long after I got his phone number, he had a cancer diagnosis. His wife called me and said, would you please pray for us?
Wow.
And they're not church attendees at that time. They have visited some, but that health situation kind of opened that door to that conversation and to be asked to be praying for him. That gave me a open the door then to check back in with them and say, Kim, how are you guys doing and what's going on and how can we be of help? And so every household was a little different. Each one responded all respond positively, but they responded at different speeds.
Hmm.
And so we've borrowed a little word, a phrase that some missionaries use overseas. They talk about having +1 days every day, making a positive contact of some sort. And so my wife and I use that in our neighborhood, make every day a +1 day. So at the end of the day or at dinner time, who have you talked to today? Have you seen a neighbor? Have you had a positive contact? If not, well, then who might we reach out to tonight? If I had that contact information, who am I going to call? Who am I going to text? It's a long game. It's not like I'm going to learn their whole history in one setting. Just these individual touches along the way as you grow and develop a positive relationship.
Well, and I think that, I mean, yeah, that long, slow crock pot. I like the idea of +1. Yeah, I remember a football coach I had who was like, either you get better or you get worse, and even if we got just a little bit better, right? Then that's good. We're moving. And of course, he was like, as a team, and I think like as a church, like if we're all just getting a little bit better, a little bit closer, you never know when somebody will say, "Here's my phone number," or "I've got a cancer diagnosis," or I just think people. The loneliness statistics, we could talk about that, are so high.
Yes.
And I do think, you were talking about, these people who would barely open their door, not give you their contact information, even after you had given it to them. And I think that risking of like, I'm going to put myself on the line that if you're a crazy person and you start texting me, I'll have to change my number all the time, right? Like, what if? But you putting yourself out there, I heard a pastor one time talk about love goes first, which I thought was a really good way of thinking it, that if love goes with the first interaction, then people's guards go down. But we are in this, like, I talk about like a hermeneutic of suspicion, this world of suspiciousness. And so it takes a while. Oh, they're just what's in it for me? Why are you doing this? What's your angle? And if love is our angle, then we'll see that fruit that will eventually come. But what I'm hearing is it's moved forward, and everything's gone well. It just hasn't gone fast. And so if people are there who are like, well, I'm trying, but nothing seems to be working, just kind of it almost reminds me of Jim Collins' Good to Great, like the flywheel, right? Just keep spinning the flywheel to do that.
We've done some driveway things to try to get people together. We've had 6 people show up. We've had, low attendance at some things. We've had people that you think would get involved that didn't. Along the way, offers for help or trying to draw people in. Hey, I've got an extra ticket for the baseball game in town. You want to go with me? And people saying no and things, and you feel like, gosh, am I doing this the right way? Am I going about this the right way? But then later on get a yes. It's the long game, and remembering that. And I think one of the most edifying things for me, because the full focus of it is not on me really, because I just came to understand the whole parable of this Good Samaritan, what it meant to love your neighbor. And the onus, the responsibility is on me, not on my neighbor. It's on me to love my neighbors, irregardless of how they respond. Yeah. If they shut the door and say, I don't want your cookies, I still have the responsibility to love my neighbor. It's an active word. I can't do that, sit on my couch, ignoring them. And I have that responsibility no matter the response. And I think for me, some of the most edifying situations have been neighbors that we have really taken time to get to know and find opportunities to love them, to see them now reaching out in relationship to people behind them and down the street from them, and see that grow. Wow. And there are times that we've been reminded of how very, very important this is. 6 months ago, we had a family on our street. Their 12-year-old boy died of a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
It was a tragic situation. And the dad had just started coming to my garage on Friday mornings. I get some men together. Sometimes we have 3, sometimes we've had 12. I come and have really bad free coffee and a little prayer time and visit in the early morning. And he had just kind of started coming to that, developing a relationship. And things. And I was one of the first people he called from the emergency room
Oh, wow.
and asked me to come in. And it became an opportunity for people in this neighborhood to really love on them, show them support, not just then, but in the coming weeks and months after that. So, and I would hope that we have enough relationship capital built up that if there's a tragedy in our house, that neighbors would reach out in that way as well. So you need neighbors for that type of purpose, or for going on vacation. Who's going to watch the house? There's a preemptive aspect of this in that it's easier to talk to your neighbor about their barking dog if you already have relationship with them. That conversation is going to go a lot better. So that's a reason. And then for your own mental health and physical health, there's physical health benefits to this as well. So I'm reminded of those things as we go along through this journey, and just the conversations sometimes on walks and the conversations with people. We're finding ways to do life together, and that's been really edifying.
Yeah. Well, I came across an article, and I can't remember where exactly it was, but it talked about the obvious truth. And the obvious truth is life is better if you live close to people you like. And it's like, well, duh. And the closer the people you like are, the better it is. And it's like, before we started recording, you talked about how growing up, you lived 2 doors down from your grandmother, who I'm assuming you liked.
Yes.
But talk about like how that sort of was a seed planted in your own life, and what kind of what was it like growing up for you, in the neighborhood?
Yeah, well, that's a great way to relate past to current in terms of what the culture has to say about neighboring. And this centers around some of the research I've been doing with the University of Missouri. So I do have gray hair. I'm old. I'm not, I don't like thinking of myself as old yet, but I'm older than you are. And so my growing up experience is in a small town of 1,200 then, and still 1,200 about now. And so my grandparents just lived right up the street. And my grandmother stayed at home, as did most of the other ladies her age up and down that street. And my grandmother's house was the hub of activity. I mean, they got together and played bridge once a week for bridge club. They got together and did each other's hair and permanents. They got together and did other sewing projects and things. In fact, this is a cross stitch quilt that my grandmother made back behind me here. And that house was a hub of activities, ladies coming in. There was always coffee on, and ladies at the kitchen table cracking beans and drinking a cup of coffee with my grandma. So I saw that growing up, and neighbors were a big part of the social fabric of our lives and the interaction. They were the friends. They were the people you had dinner with, that you played cards with, that watched your house or watched your kids or spanked your kids if they did something wrong, or the grandkids if you did something you shouldn't have done. And if I got in trouble in the neighborhood, man, news of it beat me back home all the time. And but it was just a really close connection, and that has, other researchers have seen that and talked about that. Some famous surveys that were done in the 50s, just about people talked about their neighbors as part of their social fabric. That's where a lot of your socialization and friendships happened. You didn't necessarily move in next to your friends, but people that lived around you became your friends. And those same surveys were repeated in the 60s and the 70s, and those social connections just continued to decline. And so I've done a research project in Missouri called The State of Neighboring. I did it in 2022 and 2024. It's a 30-question study we've done, a scientifically valid study that covers a lot of territory. But one of my favorite questions on there is the last one, where we ask people, what makes someone a good neighbor? And we give them 30 traits to pick from, and they can pick as few or as many of those traits as they want as what makes someone a good neighbor. And both of those years, the top 2 traits that make someone a good neighbor, in Missouri at least, is someone who's quiet and someone who respects my privacy. In other words, we now say a good neighbor is somebody who's quiet and leaves me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 180 degrees different from what
Yeah.
I even grew up with, certainly from what we see in the 50s. And I think for me, I mean, that was part of my story. I said I was a good neighbor because I was quiet and left my neighbors alone. And so I think oftentimes, even in my own church, we talk about being a good neighbor or a loving neighbor, and people say, all right, got this. I don't bother my neighbors, so I'm good. And so that's why with our program, we've been using the word engaged neighbor.
Mm.
We need people that are more engaged in not just in their community and their neighborhood, but in relationship with people that are around them.
Well, and I do think that, I mean, you know, that, and I think in our previous conversation when we were just talking, remembering those two things, yeah, that they you yeah, just leave people alone and be quiet and we're happy, which is such a low bar. And so this engaged neighborhood, I mean, you all have done some, some things in Missouri. So like, I mean, you were Missouri's Neighbor of the Year one year, is that right?
Well, no, this is a national award from Neighborhoods USA.
Okay.
And one of my projects was picked as the neighboring project of the year.
Neighboring project of the year. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Well, what was that project?
The creation establishment of Missouri Good Neighbor Week.
Okay. So tell us about that. What is Missouri's Good Neighbor Week? What are some of the things that you all do that week?
Yeah. Well, for me, it began with National Good Neighbor Day. It was something I started focusing on in 2019 because it is an actual national holiday. It was signed into law by President Jimmy Carter in 1978. And I'm on a team of people now. We've kind of got a committee working together. We've bought the URL for National Good Neighbor Day. We're trying to make resources available, getting people to think about neighboring. And I latched on that holiday because of, again, that media marketing background of mine, thinking about what makes it newsworthy, what help media outlets carry the story for us, and tying it to a holiday and encouraging people to do an act of kindness for a neighbor on National Good Neighbor Day. So, but September 28th is the date that is always on, and that moves around the calendar. And sometimes it's on a Monday, and that's not real helpful when you're trying to get people to do acts of kindness. And so I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting in my town, and my state rep just happened to be sitting at the table. And he was asking me about it because we had just finished up our National Good Neighbor Day, asked me what my dream was for that. Nobody asked me that. I hadn't really thought of it. And I just said, I think it'd be fun to celebrate for a whole week in Missouri. And then it was 3 or 4 months later, he called and said, hey, I've got a bill on the floor of the House for Missouri Good Neighbor Week. Would you come and testify? And he said, it's a long haul. We won't get a pass this year. Come to the committee. You might get 5 minutes. So I went and spoke to the committee. I got 20 minutes. We picked up 2 co-sponsors out of that committee. And then through a miraculous series of events, on the last day of the Missouri legislature, that bill was attached to another one and it passed. So Missouri Good Neighbor Week became a thing. It begins on September 28th, which is the national holiday, and continues through October 4th. And we have a corresponding website with that. And the initiative is still the same. Do an act of kindness for your neighbors and then tell us about it. We have a goal each year. And last year we had almost 20,000 acts of neighboring done in Missouri that people told us about. And sometimes it's big things. Sometimes it's just simple things. Strong ties, weak ties, they both have value. It's all about steps that you can take to develop those positive relationships. So this year, our goal is 25,000 acts of kindness. The project has expanded to include Habitat for Humanity now. The Hopeful Neighborhood Project is part of Missouri Good Neighbor Week. And then we're also crunching our data a little differently, and we're actually going to recognize 4 cities and 4 different age or size categories as the most neighborly city in Missouri based on participation levels in this. So it's just a whole week and an opportunity to tell people, if you don't know your neighbors, if you haven't taken those steps, this is the week to do this. You got an easy excuse now. And there's lots of ways to do it, and we'll help you do it, and we'll reinforce it, and we'll try to encourage and recognize and reward those who do.
Well, yeah, the legislative process, I'm sure it's its own thing. But to be able to have that, like, just what it feels like is a successful thing is when it does come from the top. There's some sort of standing, but also it just comes from underneath. Like it comes from people here, and this combination that, again, you're kind of marrying these two, both from a professional level and a personal level. Yeah, there we go. National Good Neighbor Week. And those are the things you heard about, right? And like, not, we can only trust that there's more stories out there that you'll never know about. And that it and maybe somebody doesn't even make the connection, but they did that because somebody did something for their mom, and they decided that would work out well in Ohio or Oklahoma or wherever people tend to be. Now, you also have like Archer Neighborhood Week or something like that. What was that about?
Yes, we did something. The pilot of that was called Lawn, which was lawn art with neighbors. That started during COVID in the Springfield area, and it was all about public art and public art for your neighborhood or with your neighbors. And then that kind of fizzled locally after 4 years, 3 years, I guess. And so with an extension, we launched this year really a statewide effort. It's called Show Me Neighborhood Art Week. And we just finished up giving out some of the awards in that category, and it was all about public art. Bonus points if you do public art with your neighbors of some sort. Okay. And then we were able to do Best of Show, which was based on online votes for art. We had Judge's Choice, which was selected as the best for Missouri. We gave out art to those who won as the best art. Let's see, we had 85 sites across the state of Missouri where people did art for the week, public art, and just have had really positive feedback on that. Groups wanting to do it again next year and excited. So we love encouraging public art. The value that brings helps to create a sense of belonging in a community and among individuals. I did an art project in my neighborhood, and I had some neighbors that I didn't really know very well, but they liked art. And so they came to my garage. We paid barn quilts. Okay. And displayed them all together. And that, for a couple of them, that was the first opportunity I'd ever had to have much of a conversation with them. So it opened some doors for me personally, and I'm sure it did for others across the state.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine some people are just driving by and they're like, what in the world is this? And then they stop or they see people out there, and it does just create that. And one of my favorite quotes is a C.S. Lewis quote where he says, friendship begins at the moment one person says to another, what, you too? I thought I was the only one. Oh, yeah. And so that's what I'm imagining your neighbors are like, I thought I was the only one who enjoyed, these barn arts or whatever it is, that like to find somebody who surprisingly is like you is such a gift. And it can be such a connection point. I think when I moved to seminary, I went to seminary in Kentucky, and so people would come from all over. And I'm a 49er football fan. So I hope you're not a Chiefs fan. I'm guessing you are from just your location. But like I still talk with my friends who I've met who are 49er fans. Because that was our connection. And then every year when the games come back around, we're still texting during the Super Bowl and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So we need those, and probably people have things in common with their neighbors that they won't know until they put it out there. Until they throw it out there and just kind of see, oh, I didn't know. I was having that conversation with my across the street neighbor about taking the trash cans, and he was telling me he played music with a neighbor down the street. I had no idea. And so, it's just like, okay, log that in my brain, put that in my my Bless app that we've been using as a church to be like, okay, he's a musician, just to remember
Yes.
that.
What a
Now,
good asset to tap into in the future.
yes. Well, that's one of the things that I'm sort of thinking ahead, and I sort of just planted the seed. Was like, I'm thinking, what if we did a later in the fall? And I'm thinking Good Neighbor week-ish, is like, what if we had a neighborhood gathering and I brought my grill to the front yard and him and our neighbor played music, and we just starting to churn those seeds, and maybe it's just four of us, and that's my family, and we're out there grilling, playing cornhole. But maybe there would be some who would just, do that, plan that with us. That's one of the things that I'm thinking, hey, we can do that. Now, one of the things that you talked about, as you said, engage neighbor. Now you have a lot of resources for people. You have a newsletter, you've got a blog, you've got literature, a big list of all the stuff that you can read. Tell people about kind of the Engaged newsletter, and how they can be a part of that, and what you try to do with that.
Yeah, it's a free emailed newsletter every 2 weeks. It's been an award winner at Neighborhoods USA as well for several years. Really just trying to tie together research and practical application of neighboring all around the USA and what that looks like, and give you examples of maybe some things you want to do. Link you to interviews that I do with other people all across the U.S. about projects they've done, a mural project in one community, or things that people do to pull their neighbors together, interesting stories. So that newsletter is really meant as a way to kind of tie that together and let you know of opportunities or programs that are coming up. That's
Okay.
one of the best ways we can let you know. The Becoming an Engaged Neighbor Facebook page, I publicize those things on that page as well, but also every day I'm posting a link to an article or an example of good neighboring, or a research article about neighboring every day. So I think that information is useful to people who want to get a little more nerdy about the subject and learn everything they can about it. You don't have to do that in order to be a more engaged neighbor, but we try to make those resources available because we're an educational institute. So we're trying to extend and provide research and education that help give people the tools they need to move forward with being a more engaged neighbor.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I follow the Facebook page and get the email. And one of those things that's kind of nice about an email is sometimes I won't read it, right? Like, and then other times it's like, man, oh yeah, I was thinking about something. And so, I know people are just bombarded with email lists and other such stuff, but it
Yes.
is, again, what we take in, it helps us to shape our mind, and we may not read it, and that's okay. But with sometimes the right thing, I was looking at it, the one that you sent out, was this a July? Oh, this was a June one, but, there was, or maybe it was the July one. Talk about join or die.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So because I randomly, I have a friend who works for the city, and he said, what could we do about having a showing of this in Tulsa? This was like 5 months ago, and then I saw this, and so I sometimes believe in like connecting the dots at this and this. So tell people about join or die, and then how did you get the ability to just show that?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember what my first connection was over this. You mentioned about people getting a connection, realizing, oh, I'm not the only one that has this interest. And that's a little bit what has happened to me with neighboring too. As you have conversations like this or with others, you're like, oh, I'm not the only person interested in this subject. And, and then you cross pollinate with each other across the USA. And the Join or Die movie came out maybe 2 years ago now, maybe. At most, but it's really a documentary based on the life of Robert Putnam, who wrote the book Bowling Alone. And it's a classic book. Many would consider a must read, but it is a textbook. You won't say it's a page turner, but it is certainly the book that defines social capital and really kind of paved the way for some of these conversations. And it's important to know that research. Well, the movie is much more accessible than the book is. And it's up to date a little bit in some ways. And the title is really about this idea that a key to our democracy, to our nation, had been our ability to form associations and work together in associations, regardless of background, class, interest. Alexis de Tocqueville saw that when he was here in the early beginnings of our nation, that was a key to the American experiment. And Robert Putnam's research has shown that in nations where this ability to join together diminishes, the government, the democracy diminishes as well. And so that's kind of the theme, join. By joining means a club, organization, a nonprofit in town, join, or our society, our democracy will die, join or die. So that's the challenge. So I had reached out to them. They were, there was a period there, they were only showing it online. You had to make arrangements for it. But then they started to trusted people releasing the file to be shown at movie theaters and other settings. Now we had to pay for it. And it's based on how many people you think will show up and attend. So did have to pay a fee to get that, but it was manageable. We showed it in Springfield at a theater a couple of nights. We're showing it again in August at a church in downtown Springfield a couple of nights. In the city of Republic to kick off Missouri Good Neighbor Week.
Okay.
So I just love the theme, the social capital, and encouraging people. What are the organizations in your community that you can join and work in and engage with your community?
Yeah. Well, and I do think that, I try to stay a safe distance away from politics and a lot of things, but it does seem like with the rhetoric that is going on in our world, with the anger, as somebody once said, it used to be, I think I'm right and you're wrong when it relates to politics. Now it's, I think I'm right and you're evil as it relates to politics. That, how do we counteract this? And I think it is just like loving our neighbor and being curious and seeing people and engaging with people and again, understanding, trying to find a way to understand. We still may not agree, but at least we don't think the other person is, evil. And again, going back to the story of the Good Samaritan, if anybody had in that culture, yes, the others, the Samaritans were evil, but that's not what this person did, right? That's not what the Samaritan did who saw this person. It was, no, I'm embracing, I'm engaging with, I'm being merciful to my neighbor. And so that's, part of what I think we have to do. So, well, I might reach out and hopefully maybe I can get a few other people from Tulsa to help me, join or die and see if we can't get it started here.
And it does relate to what you're talking about, because it's a documentary, so they have some sound clips, some bites from people that have been engaged with Robert Putnam's work in the past, and some of them are political figures, and they may not be on your side of the aisle of your preference. It doesn't mean they don't have something good to say, and it doesn't mean there's not a lesson to be learned here. But even in my own hometown, when we had showed the movie and I showed up at the city council to talk about a neighboring project we were working on, somebody who I did not know, who has never had a conversation with me at all, showed up and railed about how the city shouldn't be partnering with me because I dared to show this movie that had this horrible individual in it. And, I wasn't real happy about that. But at the same time, I was also thinking, well, this is case study example number one of where we end up when we don't get to know people around us, when we fall into that sort of what's called a trust and fear spiral. We don't know people around us, so therefore we don't have trust. And the next step is we fear them, or we think they're horrible, and we make up a narrative about them, and we don't even know them. So overcoming that with individuals and with institutions, establishing trust so you can work together, it takes time, but it is so very important. So I think the movie led to really great conversations in Springfield and a couple of new spin-off efforts. I think, one movie may not change the heart of people, but I think it's a great discussion and a great thing that can motivate some people.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll if anybody in Tulsa wants to help me get that, just reach out to me and I'll be glad to do it. And this idea of this trust and fear spiral that you mentioned, just rings so many bells with. And again, that's where that's kind of that suspicious network. And so it's like,
Yes.
oh, what are my neighbors doing? Oh, I'm afraid, all this kinds of stuff. And then yeah, so how do we break it? Is we go with love, as you talked about at the very beginning. We go into it with love instead of apathy. And that it is, we are each other's keepers and
It,
neighbors. So yeah,
it takes time. It takes time to get past that. I'll just give you an example, even in my own hometown. This is with churches. Um, I have something called a neighborhood mission project, neighborhood mission trip. It's a little packet I've put together and kind of has an outline. We often send people through from our church out to another country to go on a mission trip. What would it look like if we organized people in our church to go out on a mission trip in our neighborhoods? What would that look like, and how could we organize that? And so in my hometown, the city's not had a ministerial alliance in a long time. And so I've been working for almost 2 years to get our churches, our pastors together at one time to start to know each other, to establish trust so we can work on some projects. We just had our first meeting back in June. We had 29 people representing 14 churches there, which was really a great turnout for the size of our town. But it took 2 years to get to that point.
Wow.
And if we don't have relationship, we'll never have trust. If we don't have trust, we won't work together. But already from that effort, we have other meetings coming up, and we're already talking about joint projects just by getting together and hearing each other's heart and trying to establish some trust. It's the grease that helped the wheels turn. And when we work together, whether it's individuals or churches, some great things can happen.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you. I have, before we wrap up, just a couple of, all right. So if somebody wants to engage in Good Neighbor Day or Good Neighbor Week, what are like 4 or 5 simple things somebody could do to start with?
To be a better neighbor, even
to be a better neighbor. If you want to do something kind of Good Neighbor Day, but you don't know where to start, what are 4 or 5 things that maybe you've seen people do, or this act of kindness? What are some things, just if we're not very creative today, help us to help get our minds started?
Well, I've always said the 3 steps to being the 3 starting steps to being a better neighbor are: learn the names of your neighbors, find ways to use the names of your neighbors, and do a small get together. Okay. That could be ice cream sandwiches on the driveway. You don't have to overthink it. It's about connections, not entertainment. But it all starts with names. People love to hear the names, and then find ways to interact with them and use the name, to see them out and to build those connections. Those are really your starting points. And then if you're really wanting to do something for National Good Neighbor Day or Good Neighbor Week, or just start anytime on your own, I'd say go back to your assets, to your gifts and talents. What are you passionate about? What are you good at? My wife loves coffee. I do not. And but one of the things we did early on and continue to do is we have a Saturday morning coffee get together in the garage. It's a pretty low entry point type of thing to make happen. We put flyers on doors, this Saturday, come up, have some coffee. Sometimes we have donuts. We've had, I did 55 cups of coffee at the last one we just did. Sometimes we've had fewer than that, but people sat around. Some people come and stay for the whole 2 hours and visit. Some kind of come and go, but that's like a low entry point. If that's something you're passionate about, she's passionate about coffee, so that's why we do that. There may be something else you're passionate about. Use what you're passionate about so it doesn't feel so forced, and just find ways to build those connections. Again, it's not entertainment. It's about building connections. So keep that your focus.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and we as a church have been using the Bless app. and to get up to know our neighbors' names. And that's been a really just a good thing that, again, because people will tell you and it goes in and out of your brain, but having that to help confirm, be able to take some notes, that's just been a great tool. All right, so
And
I have some rapid fire questions for you.
okay. All right. Well,
All right, so just this is top of your
get
mind.
ready.
Whatever you kind of come to. So, what is your favorite word?
I guess I would say neighbor now.
um, that I think that's probably it's been a good word for you. Okay, what is the most unusual or unique thing in your house?
A 200-year-old toothpick holder from a grandparent.
Wow. Okay. That's great. Yeah. I don't
Isn't
think
that a
you'd find
strange
that.
thing to have had
That is a
survived?
strange thing. Yes. 200 years. Very good. What is the best 30 minutes of your summer? What was the best single 30-minute period?
Oh, wow. Well, I would say something, with my wife. We recently had a dinner at Finley Farms in Ozark, and it was really beautiful setting. Great. Is a highlight of the summer. My wife would probably say it was some sort of random conversation I had on the sidewalk with a neighbor where she saw me laughing and waving my arms around sometime.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. What is something you wish you had more time for?
To finish writing the book I'm working on.
About neighboring, I'm assuming.
Yes,
Does it have a title?
it does.
Well, hey, you've got a title. You've started it. Now it's just finishing
It's
the work.
it's outlined and everything. The chapters are going to be focused on the engaged neighbor principles
Okay.
that I have developed, and the working title is actually "No More Good Neighbors."
Very good. All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. So you could do that. I'm sure you have other things that you could do. All right. I got a few more questions. What is something that you are currently rethinking?
Burnout.
Tell me more.
Alan Briggs, who's in Colorado, wrote a book several years ago called "Staying is the New Going," which got me to personally rethink mission trips and mission, what that means. And he's just recently written a book about burnout and being overcommitted in some areas. And just listened to a podcast and just getting ready to read the book. And it's already kind of got me thinking. I loved Kevin DeYoung's book, Crazy Busy, as well. And I made some changes in life when I read that. And so I feel like this is potential to do the same type of thing. Not every good thing you could do is something that you should do, and prioritizing time to prevent burnout.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. My wife, I don't remember who wrote it, but very popular author, The Best Yes. And this idea of like, what is the best yes? Not just a yes, but like, what's like yes, exclamation mark, and only do those things. Kind of that same sort of
Yes.
idea.
That.
One of my favorite people to read and listen to is a guy by the name of Steve Cuss. I don't know if you've ever come across him. I think he's actually in Colorado Springs. He's written a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety. He has a podcast called Being Human. And he does this podcast. He does these kinds of, I steal this from him. He does a thing called the Gauntlet. And so it's these kind of questions at the end. But he's got great stuff. Just wrote a book called The Expectation Gap. But his one of his questions that he asked people is, when have you most recently felt the most loved?
Oh, wow. I just had my 40th high school class reunion 2 weeks ago. And one, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs. But when we left, I think it was that evening, my wife texted all of our kids. We have a text chat. And she just wrote a beautiful text about how proud she was of me and seeing me in that setting with classmates and just a lot of them she'd never met, and the impression I just felt like I was seen and understood in that
Hey.
situation, and I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, that's sweet. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your time. And any final words to any of our folks as they kind of go out into this adventurous thing called loving your neighbor?
Well, I know Dave Runyon calls it the art of neighboring. I sometimes call it the adventure of neighboring, because it is an adventure. And if you'll open your heart to other people and pray about those opportunities, God will give you opportunities to build connection and to bless others, like your app reminds you. So go forth and do likewise. Love your neighbor, and great things will happen in your community.
Well, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Enjoyed it.